air in the great hall was thick with the scent of power, a heady mix of roasted boar, pine from the hearth fires, and the sharp metallic tang of the pack's collective dominance. Heavy tapestries depicting ancient hunts muffled the sounds of the blizzard raging against the stone fortress, but nothing could mute the low, rumbling hum of 200 wolves gathered under one roof. I moved through the spaces they left, a wraith in homespun wool, my head bowed and my presence deliberately erased. To be an Omega in the court of the Alpha King was to be less than a shadow. It was to be the cold spot the shadow leaves behind. My purpose was simple: to refill goblets, clear discarded platters, and remain unseen. My hands, chapped in red from lye soap, trembled slightly as I poured dark, spiced wine for a broad-shouldered beta, careful not to let a single drop splash onto the heavy oak table. He didn't look at me. No one ever did. I was Cerise, a name as common and forgettable as a river stone, a creature of the pack, but not truly of it. Wolfless, voiceless in their councils, a barren field in a world that prized strength and lineage above all else. My shame was a cloak I wore more faithfully than my own skin. From the corner of my eye, I watched the high table, where he sat upon a throne carved from the bones of a great white stag, King Branech Thornival. His presence was not a sound but a pressure, a shift in the very gravity of the room. Even from this distance, he was a terrifying masterpiece of an alpha. Hair the color of scorched earth fell across a brow, creased with the weight of his crown. A scar, pale and silvered, cut from his left temple down across his jaw, a permanent reminder of the war that had forged his reign. Whispers said his wolf was a monster, a beast of pure winter fury, that had single-handedly broken the back of the last rebellion. Tonight his wolf was quiet, but the man was no less formidable. His stillness was more menacing than any snarl. My heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs whenever his gaze swept the hall. It was a reflexive, primal fear, the instinct of the lamb noting the passing shadow of the eagle. He was the sun, and I was a speck of dust, content to drift in the forgotten corners where his light never reached. But tonight the air felt different. It was brittle, charged with an unspoken anticipation that had nothing to do with the blood moon feast. A strange coppery scent wove through the familiar smells of the hall, a scent of old earth and something akin to rust. The feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck, a sensation so foreign I almost dropped my jug of wine. I had perfected the art of invisibility. To be seen was to be judged, and judgment was a blade I could not survive. But the shadows that had always hidden me were about to burn away, leaving me exposed under the crimson gaze of the moon. The drumming began then, a slow, deep pulse that vibrated up from the flagstones and into my bones. The pack quieted, their boisterous laughter and low growls fading into a respectful hush. Elder Maeve was making her way toward the high table. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes clouded with the sight. She carried a smoking thurible, the source of that strange metallic scent, a mix of dried bloodroot and silver dust, used for the annual blessing of the Alpha's line. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her gnarled hands surprisingly steady, as she offered the blessing to the king, then his beta, and down the line of his most trusted warriors. I kept my head down, focusing on a smear of grease on the floor, praying the ritual would end quickly so I could retreat back to the kitchens, back to the anonymity I craved. But the drumming in my chest was growing louder, syncing with the beat from the hide drums, and a cold dread was seeping into my marrow. The blessing was almost complete. Maeve had reached the end of the high table and was turning back toward the hearth. But then she stopped. The thrum of the drums faltered as she stood unnervingly still, her head cocked as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. Her milky eyes scanned the lower tables, passing over warriors and their mates, her gaze a slow-moving searchlight. My blood went cold. Don't see me, don't see me, don't see me. It was a silent, desperate prayer. But the sight did not care for prayers. Her gaze found me. It snagged on me, a physical force that pinned me to the spot. The silence in the hall became absolute, a ringing void where 200 heartbeats seemed to have stopped at once. Maeve began to walk toward me, her steps shuffling but certain. The pack parted before her like a grim sea, their eyes following her, and then, inevitably, landing on me. I stood frozen, a clay jug of wine clutched in my numb fingers. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear, but my feet were rooted to the stone. The weight of their collective stare was suffocating, a physical pressure that threatened to crush my lungs. They were seeing me for the first time, and it was not with indifference, but with a dawning hostile curiosity. Maeve stopped a foot away. The smoke from her thurible billowed around us, smelling of secrets and decay. Her clouded eyes stared into mine, and I felt as if she were peering past my flesh, past my bones, and into the very essence of my blood. Her wrinkled lips parted. "There is she began, her voice a dry, rasping whisper that carried to every corner of the silent hall. "There is an echo here, a shadow." She reached out a trembling, claw-like hand and laid it on my forearm. The moment her skin touched mine, a jolt, sharp and electric, shot through me, but it was her reaction that stole my breath. She recoiled as if burned, her eyes widening in a mask of pure horror. She stumbled back, dropping the thurible. It clattered against the stone, spilling glowing embers and a cloud of acrid smoke. "Treachery!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with age and terror. "Deceit in our very halls!" A low, dangerous growl rumbled through the pack. It started with the warriors near the front and spread like wildfire. A wave of aggression and suspicion, all of it was directed at me. My mind reeled, unable to process what was happening. Echo? Shadow? What did she mean? The king's beta, a hulking brute named Gunnar with a face like a clenched fist, rose to his feet. "What is it, Elder? What do you see?" Maeve pointed a shaking finger at me, her face contorted in disgust. "Her blood! It is not of this pack. It sings a song of poison and ruin." She took a ragged breath, her eyes blazing with a terrible certainty. "It is the blood of the Volkov, the Ravagers, the line we drowned in fire and steel." The name fell into the silence like a block of ice, shattering the air. Volkov, the cursed line, the pack of monsters from the eastern wastes who had nearly torn the kingdom asunder a generation ago. They were the boogeymen from pup stories, the cautionary tales of what happened when a wolf lets beast devour its soul. A collective gasp swept the hall, followed by a surge of pure, undiluted hatred. Snarls erupted, teeth flashing in the torchlight. The faces that had ignored me for 20 years were now twisted with murderous rage. My parents. The couple who had raised me, distant and cold, always treating me like a burden. They were Thornival blood. I knew it. This had to be a mistake, a seer's madness, but as I looked at the fury aimed at me, a cold seed of truth began to sprout in the pit of my stomach. The way they never spoke of their families, the way they flinched from my touch, the utter lack of love. It wasn't just because I was an Omega. It was something more. "Kill the spy!" someone roared from the back. The cry was taken up by others. "Witch! Abomination!" I stumbled backward, the wine jug slipping from my grasp and shattering on the floor. Dark red liquid spread across the stones like a pool of blood. I was surrounded, a lone deer in a den of starving wolves. Their scents choked me, fury, bloodlust, betrayal. My life, the fragile, invisible thing I had so carefully guarded, was about to be torn apart. Just as Gunnar took a menacing step toward me, a new sound cut through the chaos. It wasn't loud. It was the simple, sharp sound of a heavy goblet being placed firmly on an oak table. But it carried the weight of absolute authority. Every wolf froze. Every snarl died in the throat. Every head turned back toward the throne. King Brennick Thornival was on his feet. He moved with a lethal grace that belied his size, descending the dais not like a king, but like a predator descending a mountain. The pack parted for him as they had for Maeve. But this time it was not out of respect for age, but out of pure, unadulterated fear. He didn't look at his warriors. He didn't look at the shrieking elder. His eyes, the color of a storm-darkened sea, were locked on me. He stopped before me, so close I had to crane my neck to see his face. He blotted out the light of the torches, casting me in his immense shadow. The scent of him was overwhelming, winter frost, cold iron, and a deep, earthy musk that spoke of ancient forests and raw power. It should have terrified me, but underneath it all, there was something else, something that called to a part of me I didn't know existed. It was a scent of safety, of belonging that made no sense at all. His gaze raked over me, intense and analytical. He was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. He saw the terror in my eyes, the trembling of my limbs, the frayed edges of my tunic. His eyes narrowed, lingering on the curve of my throat where my pulse hammered wildly. I could feel his wolf assessing me, judging me, its ancient instincts weighing the truth of the seer's words against something else, something it sensed in me. "Is it true?" His voice was a low growl, a rumble of thunder that vibrated deep in my chest. It wasn't a question for me, but a demand to the universe itself. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed tight with fear. I could only shake my head, a pathetic, jerky motion. Gunnar stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his blade. "My king, the elder has spoken. The bitch is a viper we have harbored in our nest. Give the order. I will spill her tainted blood myself." The king didn't even glance at him. He held his hand up, a gesture that commanded absolute silence. Then he did the last thing I ever expected. He reached for me, his calloused fingers, impossibly large, wrapped around my upper arm. I flinched, expecting pain, expecting to be thrown to the ground. But the moment his skin touched mine, a shock wave of energy, white-hot and blinding, arced between us. It was not like the jolt from the elder. This was a cataclysm. The world tilted on its axis, the sounds of the hall fading to a dull roar in my ears. A warmth, fierce and possessive, flooded my veins, chasing away the bone-deep chill of my fear. I saw a flash of imagery behind my eyes. A snow-covered forest, a pair of glowing gold eyes, the feeling of running under a full moon with a body that was not my own. His eyes widened, the storm within them churning with shock and disbelief. He sucked in a sharp breath, and his scent changed, the controlled frost giving way to something wilder, smokier, a possessiveness so raw and potent it was almost a physical blow. His wolf was not just seeing me, it was recognizing me. And in his eyes, I saw not just the fury of a king betrayed, but the dawning horror of an alpha finding his mate in the one person he was sworn to destroy. He dropped his hand as if my skin had burned him, but the phantom heat of his touch remained, branding me. He took a half step back, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped along his scar. The entire pack watched, their aggression now tainted with confusion at their alpha's bizarre reaction. "She is a curse, Brennick," Gunnar insisted, his voice tight with urgency. "You must end this now, before her poison spreads." The king's gaze snapped to his beta, and the sheer force of his glare made the larger wolf physically recoil. "I am the king here, Gunnar," he snarled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I decide what is poison, and I decide who bleeds." He turned his stormy eyes back to me, and for a heart-stopping moment, our gazes locked in a silent, savage battle of wills I didn't know I possessed. He was the king, he was the law. But the thing that had flared between us was older than any law, more powerful than any crown. It was a bond, ancient and irrevocable, and it had just been ignited in a hall full of enemies. He had to kill me. His duty, his people, his own history demanded it. To let a Volkov live was treason. To shelter one was madness. But his wolf, the beast that lived behind his storm-gray eyes, was now screaming a different truth. With a final agonizing effort, he tore his gaze from mine and addressed his stunned court. His voice rang with an iron authority that permitted no argument. "Seize her," he commanded, the words sounding like they were ripped from his throat. "Take her to the dungeons." He paused, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he added the words that would seal both our fates. No one is to touch her. No one is to speak to her. She is mine to deal with. Rough hands seized my arms, hauling me from my stupor. Gunner and another guard, their faces grim masks of disgust, flanked me. Their touch was brutal, their fingers digging into my flesh like talons. The pack parted before us, a sea of snarling faces and hate-filled eyes. I saw Ilara, a weaver I had sometimes shared scraps of bread with, spit on the floor where I had stood. The betrayal was a physical blow, as sharp and cold as the steel of a blade. I was no longer Ceres, the quiet Omega. I was a disease, a pestilence to be purged. My entire life, every small kindness I had shown, every moment of shared work, had been erased by a single word: Volkov. They dragged me from the warmth of the great hall, down a winding set of stone stairs into the guts of the fortress. The air grew colder with every step, heavy with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else, the faint lingering smell of old fear. The torchlight threw our shadows long and distorted against the slick, weeping walls. My thin wool tunic was no match for the subterranean chill that sank its teeth into my bones. This was it, the place where the king's justice was meted out in darkness and forgotten screams. The guard threw open a heavy, iron-banded door, the sound of its protest echoing down the narrow corridor. Gunner shoved me inside with such force that I stumbled, my knees cracking hard against the unforgiving stone floor. I cried out, a small, choked sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The door slammed shut with a deafening clang of finality. The bolt slid home, a sound like a casket being sealed. Plunged into near-total darkness, I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the cold, damp wall. A sliver of pale light from a high, narrow slit in the wall, too high to reach, too narrow to see anything but a sliver of storm-clouded sky, did little to pierce the gloom. My eyes slowly adjusted, revealing the stark reality of my new home. A stone slab for a bed, a bucket in the corner. The air was thick with the despair of everyone who had been here before me. This was a place people came to die. My body trembled uncontrollably, a storm of terror and shock racking my frame. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my fracturing world together. Volkov. The name echoed in the hollow space of my mind. It felt alien, a label for a monster. Not for me. I thought of the couple who raised me, Theron and Lyra, their coldness, their distance. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They hadn't been my parents. They had been my jailers, hiding me in plain sight, raising me as a nobody to conceal the truth of my blood. Was it a kindness, or was it the ultimate cruelty to let me live a lie, only to have it unravel in the most public and brutal way imaginable? A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. I had spent my life as a ghost, and now I was going to die as a monster. The king's final words haunted me. She is mine to deal with. It was a death sentence, delivered with a strange, possessive heat that I could still feel branding my skin where he had touched me. The shock wave of that touch lingered, a phantom warmth in the freezing cell. It was madness. My enemy, my executioner, was the other half of some cosmic soul the fates had decided to tether to mine. He would have to rip himself in two to destroy me. A small hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, sounding shrill and unhinged in the suffocating quiet. Hours passed, or perhaps it was minutes. Time had no meaning in the dark. My shivering eventually subsided into a numb ache. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, a dull pain that was a welcome distraction from the terror. I had resigned myself to a slow, cold end when I heard the scrape of the bolt. I flinched, pressing myself harder against the wall as the door groaned open. It was not Gunner. It was an older woman, Lena, the head of the castle's servants. Her face was stern, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Pity, perhaps, or just morbid curiosity. She held a torch in one hand and a bundle of cloth in the other. Behind her stood two guards, their expressions unreadable stone. "On your feet," Lena commanded, her voice devoid of warmth. Fear, sharp and immediate, lanced through me. Was this it? Was I being taken to the executioner's block? I forced my numb limbs to obey, rising unsteadily. My knees screamed in protest. "The king has decreed a change in your accommodations," she said, her tone clipped and formal. She thrust the bundle at me. "Change into these, now." I fumbled with the cloth. It was a simple, clean tunic of dark gray wool, much thicker and warmer than my own. There were soft leather slippers as well. The simple luxury of it was so unexpected, so jarring, that I could only stare at it dumbly. Why would they give me clean clothes if they were just going to kill me? Lena gestured impatiently. "Turn around, the guards will not look." I did as I was told, my back to the open door, my fingers clumsy with cold and fear as I stripped off my soiled tunic and pulled on the new one. The clean wool was soft against my skin, a small, absurd comfort in the face of my impending doom. "Come," Lena said once I was done. The guards fell in behind me as she led me out of the dungeons, up the stairs, past the great hall, and up another, more private staircase I had never been permitted to use. We walked down a long, quiet corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced Thornival ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow me with silent accusation. We stopped before a heavy oak door at the very end of the hall, in what I knew was the North Tower. Lena produced a large iron key and unlocked the door. "In here." I stepped over the threshold and stopped, my breath catching in my throat. This was no dungeon cell. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light across the room. A large bed with a thick, fur-piled mattress dominated one wall. A small table and a chair stood near the window, which was not a slit but a proper arched window, fitted with thick, leaded glass that rattled softly in the wind. On the table sat a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, a hunk of bread, and a pitcher of water. It was a cage, but it was a gilded one. The sheer senselessness of it made my head spin. First the dungeons, now this, it was a calculated form of psychological torment. Show the prisoner the gallows, then give them a feast. I turned to Lena, my eyes wide with confusion. "Why?" I whispered, the first word I had spoken since the great hall. Her expression softened for a fraction of a second. "The king's orders are not to be questioned. You will remain here. You will not try to leave. Food will be brought twice a day. The door will be locked from the outside." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "There is a bathing chamber through that door, with soap." Then she was gone, and the heavy bolt slammed home once more. The sound was just as final here as it had been in the dungeon, perhaps even more so. In the darkness I could pretend. Here, surrounded by comfort, I could not escape the truth. I was a prized prisoner, a special project. And that was infinitely more terrifying than being a common traitor. I devoured the stew like a wild animal, the hot, savory liquid a balm to my empty stomach. I drank the water, then moved to the window. The bars were elegantly wrought iron, shaped like curling vines, but they were bars nonetheless. I looked out at the courtyard, now blanketed in a thick layer of fresh snow. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world of pristine, silent white, under a sky full of cold, distant stars. It was beautiful, and it was a world I was no longer a part of. What was his game? What did Brannock Thornival want from me? Information? I had none. A confession? Of what? My very existence? He could have killed me in the great hall with a single word. He could have let his pack tear me to shreds. Instead, he had protected me with a possessive command and locked me in a tower. The contradiction was tearing at my sanity. The fire, the food, and the exhaustion began to take their toll. My body ached. My mind was a raw, throbbing wound. I stumbled into the small bathing chamber, where a basin of hot water was already waiting, steam rising in the cool air. The simple act of washing the grime and fear from my skin was a small reclamation of myself. As I scrubbed my arm, my fingers brushed over the spot where the king had grabbed me. The skin still tingled, a faint echo of that electric, world-altering shock. It was a brand, a mark of his claim, mine to deal with. I crawled into the impossibly soft bed. pulling the heavy furs up to my chin. For the first time in my life, I was warm, well-fed, and sleeping on something other than a straw pallet. And I had never been more terrified. Sleep was a long time coming. When I woke, it was to the gray light of dawn filtering through the window. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then the weight of it all came crashing back down. I was Kiris Volkov, the forbidden bloodline, prisoner of the Alpha King, who was also impossibly my mate. The sound of the bolt being drawn shot me upright in bed, my heart instantly pounding in my throat. The door swung open. It was him. King Brannock filled the doorway, a living mountain of fury and conflict. He wore no crown, just simple black leather breeches and a dark tunic that stretched across the formidable expanse of his chest. His hair was damp, as if he'd just come from training in the snow, and his scar seemed starker in the pale morning light. He held a small leather-bound book in one hand. He stepped inside and the room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and charged. His scent washed over me, that intoxicating, terrifying mix of frost and iron. But this morning it was sharper, laced with sleeplessness and a tightly controlled rage. He closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch an indictment. We were alone. His stormy eyes swept the room, noting the empty stew bowl, the used basin in the bathing chamber, before finally settling on me, huddled under the furs. His gaze was heavy, invasive, as if he could peel back my skin and read the secrets in my blood. "Did you sleep well, Omega?" he asked, his voice a low, mocking growl. He used the title like a weapon, a reminder of the lie I had lived. I flinched but refused to look away. Some small, defiant spark had ignited within me overnight. If I was going to die, I would die as myself, not as the cowering creature he expected. "As well as any prisoner might," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. He took a step closer to the bed, and my defiant courage wavered. He was immense, a force of nature contained in human form. His wolf was a palpable presence, a predator circling just beneath the surface of his skin, its golden eyes watching me from behind his gray ones. "You have a viper's tongue for a girl who should be begging for her life," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Would it make a difference?" I countered, clutching the furs tighter. His lips thinned into a hard line. He walked to the window, his back to me, staring out at the snow-covered kingdom he ruled. "You are Volkov. The blood of traitors and savages runs in your veins. My father spent 10 years cleansing this land of your kind. We burned your strongholds, salted the earth where they stood, and killed every last one of your bloodline we could find. Or so we thought." He turned back to face me, his eyes burning with the cold fire of old hatreds. "So I ask you again, who are you? How did you come to be here, a serpent coiled in the heart of my own court?" "I don't know," I said, and the desperate truth of it made my voice shake. "My name is Cerise. The people who raised me were Theron and Lyra. That is all I have ever known." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "A convenient amnesia. Do you take me for a fool?" He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping at the foot of the bed. He tossed the leather-bound book onto the mattress. It landed with a soft thud. "This is the Thornival lineage ledger. Every beta, every gamma, every omega of notable standing for 300 years is in here. Theron and Lyra are listed. They were childless." My blood ran cold. Another lie, another piece of my life proven to be a fiction. "They were given a task," he continued, his voice relentless, "to hide you, to raise you as nothing so that no one would ever look twice. But who gave them that task? Another Volkov survivor, a sympathizer in my court. Who is your master?" "I have no master," I cried, sitting up straighter. "I am just me." His eyes narrowed into slits. "There is no just you, not anymore." He moved around the side of the bed, his presence looming over me. Instinctively, I scrambled back, pressing myself against the cold stone of the headboard. He leaned in, bracing one hand on the mattress. his face inches from mine. His heat, his scent, was dizzying. My wolf, the one I never knew I had, a sleeping beast deep inside me, stirred for the first time in my life, a faint, curious tremor in the face of his overwhelming power. "Every instinct I have," he breathed, his voice a guttural whisper that was more for his wolf than for me. "Every law of my kingdom, every oath I have ever sworn, tells me to snap your pretty neck and be done with it." My breath hitched. I could feel the restrained violence humming through him, the immense effort it took for him not to act on that impulse. But he trailed off, his gaze dropping to my throat, then to my lips. His eyes darkened, the storm in them swirling with something other than hatred. It was confusion, it was hunger. "My wolf disagrees." He reached out his free hand, not with violence, but with a strange, hesitant curiosity. His fingertips, rough and calloused, brushed against my collarbone, just above the neckline of my tunic. The contact was electric. A firestorm erupted on my skin, and the bond between us roared to life, a silent, deafening scream in the space between us. His jaw clenched, and a low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound of pure, frustrated possession. I saw it then, in the depths of his eyes. The king was at war with the alpha. The alpha had found its mate, and the king had found his sworn enemy. He pulled his hand back as if my skin were acid. He straightened up, putting distance between us, his breathing harsh. He looked at me with a new kind of horror, as if I were a curse he had brought upon himself. "The blood doesn't lie," he said, his voice raspy. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door. "And now," he threw over his shoulder, his hand on the latch, "you are my problem to solve." The door closed behind him, the bolt slid home, and I was left alone in my gilded cage, trembling not from fear of the king who wanted me dead, but from the terrifying, impossible pull of the alpha who had just claimed me as his. Days bled into one another in a monotonous cycle of gray dawns and fire-lit nights. I became a creature of the tower, my world defined by 4 stone walls, a barred window, and the deafening silence. Twice a day, the bolt would slide back, and Lena would enter with a tray of food. She never spoke, and her eyes were always carefully averted, as if looking at me directly might be a form of contamination. She would stoke the fire, leave the food, and retreat, locking me back into my gilded solitude. The silence was a living thing, a weight that pressed down on me, forcing me inward. In the quiet, I began to explore the unfamiliar landscape of myself. The girl who was Cirista Lyra, the overlooked Omega, was a costume I had worn for so long I'd mistaken it for my own skin. Now, that skin was being peeled away, revealing something raw and unknown beneath. I would sit for hours by the fire, my gaze lost in the flames, and try to feel the wolf Brannoc's presence had awoken. It was not a voice or a conscious thought, but a subtle shifting in my senses. The scent of snow on the wind was sharper, the crackle of the logs in the hearth more distinct. Sometimes a low, restless energy would thrum through my veins, a desperate urge to run, to feel the cold air in my lungs and the packed earth beneath my feet. It was a phantom instinct, the ghost of a form I had never known. My prison came with a small, unexpected library. On a stone shelf built into the wall were a dozen leather-bound volumes. Histories of the Great War, chronicles of the Thornival kings, and treatises on pack law. I read them voraciously, my fingers tracing the elegant, faded script as I pieced together the history of my own damnation. The Thornival texts painted the Volkoffs as demonic. They were the Ravagers, the moon-crazed, a pack that had given itself over entirely to the beast, practicing dark blood rituals and seeking to conquer the land through sheer, brutal savagery. The histories spoke of their alpha, Ivan Volkov, as a monster of legend, a wolf so large and feral he was said to be more beast than man. They described his slaughter at the Battle of the Frozen River, the final stand where King Theron, Brannoc's father, had supposedly wiped their bloodline from the face of the earth. I read the words, and a part of me recoiled in horror. This was my blood, this legacy of madness and destruction. But another, deeper part of me, the nascent wolf, felt a flicker of defiance. History is written by the victors. What was the truth the Thorneville scribes had burned along with the Volkov strongholds? There were no answers in these books, only the polished, self-serving narrative of my enemies. One evening, with the blizzard once again screaming at the tower walls, Lena brought my meal. But alongside the usual tray was a new object, a thick folded blanket of dark fur, wolf fur by the look of it, its color the deep rich black of a moonless night. It was far finer than the furs on the bed, impossibly soft and heavy. I looked at Lena, a question in my eyes, but she just set it on the foot of the bed and left without a word. I approached it cautiously, as if it were a sleeping animal. I reached out a trembling hand and touched it. A faint familiar warmth seemed to cling to the fibers, a residual heat that had nothing to do with the fire. And then there was the scent. It was subtle, almost undetectable, but it was there, woven into the very essence of the fur. Frost, iron, and the deep, wild musk of the Alpha King. My breath hitched. This was his. A blanket from his own chambers, his own bed. The intimacy of the gesture was a physical blow. It wasn't a kindness from the king. It was a possessive mark from the Alpha. It was a message. You are mine. You are under my protection. You will find comfort only in what I provide. Anger, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. I snatched the blanket, my first instinct to throw it into the fire, to watch his scent and his claim turn to ash. But as my fingers sank into the plush fur, the wolf inside me stirred, whining with a strange, contradictory yearning. It recognized the scent of its alpha, its mate. It craved the security and warmth the blanket offered. My human mind was repulsed by the gesture, but my primal self was soothed by it. The war inside me raged. To accept the blanket was to accept his claim, to surrender a piece of myself to the man who held my life in his hands. To reject it was to freeze, to deny the very instinct that was just beginning to wake within me. With a choked sob of frustration, I threw the blanket onto the chair by the fire, turning my back on it. But I could not escape its scent, which slowly, insidiously, began to fill the small room. Several more days passed. I did not touch the blanket, though my eyes were often drawn to the pool of darkness it made on the chair. My defiance was a small, cold comfort. I had just finished my morning meal when I heard the bolt slide open at an unscheduled time. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't Lena. Elder Maeve stood in the doorway, her small, stooped frame wrapped in dark, heavy robes. The two guards who accompanied her remained in the hall, their faces impassive. Maeve stepped inside, and the door was closed but not bolted, leaving her alone with me. The air in the room instantly grew colder, the fire in the hearth seeming to shrink away from her presence. Her scent was dry and herbal, like brittle leaves and bitter roots. "So," she rasped, her milky eyes scanning the room, taking in the comfortable bed, the remnants of my meal, the books on the shelf. Her gaze lingered on the black wolf pelt draped over the chair, and a look of profound disgust twisted her wrinkled features. "The little viper is kept warm in the nest." I stood up, my spine straightening, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The cowering Omega was gone, burned away in the great hall. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice tight. She took a shuffling step closer, her eyes fixing on me. It felt like being pinned by a shrike. "I want to see the abomination the king sees fit to protect. I want to smell the stench of Volkov blood that he is apparently blind to." "I am not an abomination," I said, the words tasting strange and new on my tongue. "I am a woman who did not know her own name." A dry, rattling laugh escaped her. "Oh, you are Volkov through and through. The arrogance is already taking root." She pointed a gnarled finger at me. "Do not think for a moment that his interest will save you. The pack is restless. They whisper of the king's weakness, of the curse he harbors in this tower. They remember the stories. They remember the smell of their own kin's blood spilled by your kind." "I have spilled no one's blood," I shot back, my voice rising. "I have done nothing but serve this pack my entire life." Your very existence is a crime, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She was closer now, close enough that I could see the faint web of red veins in her clouded eyes. You carry the taint. It is a rot that spreads. Can you not feel it? The beast that slumbers in your veins? The Volkovs did not just command their wolves. They fed them. They indulged their every dark appetite until the man was consumed and only the monster remained. That is your inheritance. Her words struck a terrifying chord. The restlessness I felt, the strange urges, was that the beginning of the taint she spoke of? Was I destined to become a monster? Doubt, cold and slick, tried to worm its way into my heart, but I fought it back. And what is your inheritance, elder? I asked, my voice shaking but defiant. To cling to old hatreds? To see ghosts in a girl who has never known a moment of power in her life? Maeve's face contorted with fury. It seemed my defiance was something she had not anticipated. You think this is about hatred? You foolish child. This is about survival. It is about prophecy. My blood ran cold. Prophecy? There are older magics than pack law, she whispered, her eyes glowing with a feverish light. Truths written in the patterns of the moon and the whispers of the wind. The seers of my mother's generation spoke of it. A warning paid for in blood. She leaned in, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. They spoke of the last daughter of the Ravagers, a seed of destruction hidden in the snow, waiting for the winter to thaw. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each beat a painful thud, a seed of destruction. Me. The prophecy says that when the cursed blood is found by the winter wolf, she continued, her gaze boring into me, a bond will form, a chain forged in the heart of the storm. It will not be a blessing, girl. It will be an anchor that drags this entire kingdom to the bottom of a sea of blood. Her words painted a horrifying picture. The connection I felt to Brenek, the impossible magnetic pull, it wasn't just a mated bond. It was the fulfillment of a doomsday prophecy. He will be forced to choose, Maeve snarled, her face inches from mine, her breath smelling of decay. He will choose between his crown and his curse, between his kingdom and his mate. And the prophecy is clear. The winter wolf will break his kingdom on the altar of his bond. He will choose you, and in doing so, he will doom us all. She straightened up, a look of grim triumph on her face, having delivered her poison. So enjoy your warm room and your alpha's scent, little viper. Every comfort he gives you is another nail in the coffin of the Thornival pack. He thinks he is controlling the problem. He doesn't realize he is nurturing the apocalypse. She turned and shuffled to the door, rapping sharply on the wood. The guards opened it immediately. She paused on the threshold, looking back at me one last time, her eyes filled with a cold, absolute certainty. He will not be able to kill you, she said, her voice flat and final. And that is a pity that will cost us everything. The door closed, and the bolt slid home, plunging the room back into silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of her words, with the weight of a terrible world-ending destiny. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the warmth from the fire no longer reaching me. I was not just a political prisoner. I was a ticking bomb. And the king who held my life in his hands was unknowingly holding the detonator. My bond with him wasn't a secret hope for survival. It was a death sentence for everyone. Maeve's prophecy was a poison that seeped into the marrow of my bones. Every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the wind, sounded like a footstep of doom. I paced the confines of my room like a caged animal, the elder's words a tormenting loop in my mind. He will choose you, and in doing so, he will doom us all. The bond that had been a source of terrifying wonder was now a brand of cosmic guilt. My very existence was a threat to the thousands of souls living under Brannek's rule. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were feverish, filled with images of snow turning red with blood, of a great white stag, its antlers crowned in thorns, falling in a storm. I would wake with my heart pounding, the sheets tangled around me, The scent of frost and iron from the wolf pelt on the chair, a constant, mocking reminder of the alpha whose bond was my curse. I began to hate the blanket, to hate the scent, to hate the part of me that still craved its phantom comfort. One night, unable to bear the suffocating confines of the room any longer, I threw open the heavy wooden shutters of my window. The blizzard had returned with a vengeance, a maelstrom of wind and ice that rattled the glass and screamed like a banshee. The cold was a physical shock, a brutal slap that momentarily cleared my head. I leaned against the bars, letting the icy wind whip my hair and sting my cheeks, breathing in the raw, clean scent of the storm. For the first time in days, the wolf inside me felt a flicker of something other than restless anxiety. It was a thrill, a wild joy in the face of the tempest power. It did not fear the storm. It recognized it as a kindred spirit. This wildness, this untamable force. Was this the Volkov blood Maeve had warned me about? Was this the beginning of the taint? The thought was terrifying, but the feeling was exhilarating. It was the first time I had felt truly alive since I had been locked away. A movement in the courtyard below caught my eye. A lone figure, a silhouette against the swirling white, was making his way from the barracks toward the main keep. Even from this distance, through the curtain of snow, I knew him. The breadth of his shoulders, the confident, predatory stride. It was Brenek. He was uncloaked, seemingly impervious to the biting wind, his dark hair quickly becoming dusted with white. He paused in the center of the courtyard and looked up, his gaze sweeping the fortress walls. My heart stopped. For a breathless moment, his head tilted, and I felt his gaze locked directly onto my window. It was impossible. He couldn't see me in the darkness of my room, but the bond that tethered us was a sense all its own. I felt the sharp, intense focus of his attention as surely as if he had called my name. The king in the storm, staring up at his prisoner in the tower. The air between us crackled with an unspoken tension, a silent conversation of longing and damnation, and then, as quickly as it happened, he lowered his head and continued on his way, disappearing into the keep. I stumbled back from the window, my body trembling, my skin prickling with cold, and something else. The raw, undeniable power of our connection. Maeve was right. This was no ordinary bond. It was a force of nature, as wild and uncontrollable as the blizzard itself, and it was going to destroy him. The next day, something changed. It began with the door. Lena brought my morning meal, but after she left, I noticed the heavy iron bolt on the outside had not been thrown. The door was still closed, but it was unlocked. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A test? A trap? If I walked out, would Gunnar and his guards be waiting for me with drawn blades? I stood before the door for a long time, my hand hovering over the iron latch. Fear warred with a desperate, clawing need for freedom, for a single moment of choice. My prison had been absolute. This small change, this single unlocked door, was a seismic shift in my reality. It was an indulgence, a crack in the bars of my cage, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, that it had come from him. He had seen me at the window last night. This was his response. With a deep, shuddering breath, I pushed the latch. The door swung inward with a soft groan. The corridor beyond was empty, the portraits of his ancestors staring down at me with silent judgment. My blood sang with a terrifying mix of fear and elation. I took one step out of the room, then another, my soft leather slippers making no sound on the cold stone. I was free, but free to go where? My feet seemed to have a mind of their own, leading me not down toward the main hall and the hateful eyes of the pack, but up. There was a small spiral staircase at the end of the corridor I had never noticed before, half hidden in shadow. It led, I presumed, to the battlements of the tower. Driven by an instinct I didn't understand, I began to climb. The stairs were narrow and steep, the air growing colder and thinner with each turn. Finally, I came to a small, heavy door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped out into the full, breathtaking force of the wind. I was on the roof of the North Tower, the highest point of the fortress. The world spread out below me in a vast, unending panorama of white. Snow-laden pines marched in ranks down the mountainside, their dark green branches groaning under the weight. The wind here was a physical entity, tearing at my clothes, roaring in my ears, trying to scour the very thoughts from my head. It was glorious. I walked to the edge of the battlement, my hands gripping the icy stone crenellations. The sheer, dizzying drop to the courtyard below should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I felt as if I could breathe. The wolf inside me surged, not with restlessness, but with a profound sense of homecoming. This wildness, this height, this storm, this was its element. A sound behind me made me spin around, my heart lurching with a familiar primal fear. Bronick stood by the doorway to the stairs, watching me. He was cloaked in heavy black furs today, the hood thrown back, his dark hair whipped by the wind. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes, and his scar was a pale, stark line against his cold, reddened skin. He wasn't looking at me with hatred or suspicion. His expression was one of intense, unreadable concentration, as if he were seeing something he was struggling to understand. "I wondered if you would dare," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the roar of the wind. "You left the door unlocked," I stated, my own voice thin and reedy in the gale. "I did." He took a step toward me, his movement slow and deliberate, the way one approaches a wild, untrustworthy animal. "I wanted to see what you would do, flee, hide, or something else." "And what do you see?" I asked, holding my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to retreat. His storm-gray eyes raked over me, taking in my wind-tangled hair, my chapped lips, the defiant set of my jaw. "I see a wolf that has never been allowed to run." The words were not an accusation, but a simple, almost mournful statement of fact. The admission hung in the air between us, as stark and cold as the winter landscape. He saw it. He saw the wild thing inside me that I was only just beginning to discover myself. "Maeve came to see me," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "She told me about a prophecy." His jaw tightened, the only sign that my words had hit their mark. "Maeve is an old woman, steeped in superstition and fear." "She said our bond would destroy your kingdom," I pressed, a desperate need to hear him deny it clawing at me. "She said you would have to choose." He closed the distance between us until he was standing only an arm's length away. His sheer size blotted out the wind, creating a small pocket of stillness around me. His scent, frost, iron, and a hint of the pine forest, was overwhelming, a heady intoxicant that made my senses spin. "Do you believe in prophecies, Ceres?" he asked, his voice a low, intimate rumble. It was the first time he had used my name. It sounded like both a caress and a curse on his lips. "I believe in what I see," I whispered, my gaze locked on his. "I see a king at war with himself." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Every king is at war with himself. It is the nature of the crown." He looked away from me, out at the vast snow-covered expanse of his domain. "This land, it is in my blood. Every tree, every mountain, every wolf, my father bled for it. I have bled for it. I have sworn an oath to protect it, even from myself." He turned his intense gaze back to me. "And then there is you, a ghost, a curse, the last ember of a fire I thought we had extinguished forever." He reached out, his gloved hand stopping just short of my face. I could feel the heat of him across the small space. "And my wolf, my own soul, tells me you are none of those things. It tells me you are the other half of my own heart." The raw, agonizing honesty in his voice shattered my defenses. This was not the cold, calculating king from the tower room. This was the man, the alpha, torn between his duty and his deepest, most primal instinct. "Maeve is right about one thing," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "A choice must be made." His eyes held mine, and in their stormy depths, I saw not just the conflict, but the unbearable temptation. The indulgence he was showing me, the unlocked door, this moment on the battlements. It was not just for me. It was for him. He was testing the limits of his own control, seeing how close he could get to the flame before he was burned. "If I am a curse," I said, my voice barely audible, "then let me go. Cast me out. Let me run until the world forgets my name." A humorless, almost pained smile touched his lips. "And where would you go, little wolf? To the eastern wastes, where your only kin are the bones of your ancestors. You would not survive a week." He shook his head, a look of grim finality settling on his face. "No, I will not let you die in the wilderness." His gaze became possessive, feral. "And I will not let you go. You are here, you are mine, and we will face this curse together, or we will burn in it." Before I could process his words, before I could react, he closed the last bit of distance between us. His hand came up, not to my face, but to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. His touch was firm, possessive, sending a jolt of pure fire through my entire body. He pulled my head back, exposing the vulnerable line of my throat. I gasped, my eyes wide with shock and a terrifying, traitorous flare of anticipation. He lowered his head, his lips hovering just above the sensitive skin of my pulse point. I could feel his warm breath, see the storm swirling in his eyes. His wolf was there, right at the surface, its golden gaze burning into me. It was a claim, a prelude to a bite, an indulgence of the highest, most dangerous order. "This," he growled, his lips brushing against my skin, sending a tremor of pure, unadulterated sensation through me, "is my choice." His lips were a brand of fire against my skin. His growl a vibration that resonated straight through my bones and into the awakening wolf within me. My breath caught, my body frozen between terror and a shocking primal surrender. The world narrowed to the single point of contact, to the overwhelming scent of him, the possessive heat of his hand tangled in my hair. This was not the gentle touch of a lover. It was the savage claim of a predator, an alpha marking his territory. And my traitorous body, the Volkov blood he so despised, arched into it, craving the bite that would seal our doom. But the bite never came. With a shuddering breath that was almost a snarl of self-loathing, he pulled back. The cold air rushed into the space between us, a brutal shock after the furnace of his proximity. He released my hair, his hand dropping to his side as if my skin had burned him. He took a step back, his face a mask of granite, the storm in his eyes now a churning tempest of fury directed entirely at himself. He had crossed a line, a boundary of his own making, and the king was now at war not just with the alpha, but with the man. "Go back inside," he commanded, his voice raw and strained. He did not look at me. He stared out at the horizon, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Before I could move, a third presence made itself known. Gunnar stood in the doorway to the stairs, his massive frame blocking the exit. His face was a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. He had seen his king, the unyielding alpha of the Thornival pack, claiming the Volkov witch on the highest tower of their ancestral home. His scent, a mix of stale sweat and hot fury, drifted toward us on the wind. "My king," Gunnar said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He took a step onto the roof, his eyes flicking from Bronik's rigid back to my face, his expression one of pure venom. "What is the meaning of this? You bring the serpent out of its cage to, what, parley with it?" Bronik turned his head slowly, and the look he gave his beta was so cold, so filled with lethal authority, that even the wind seemed to quiet. "You forget your place, Gunnar." "I forget nothing," Gunnar shot back, emboldened by his own outrage. "I remember the oath we swore, to protect this pack from all enemies, foreign and domestic. She is both. You lock her away, you feed her from your own table, and now you bring her to the battlements and touch her as if she were a mate." He spat the last word like a mouthful of poison. She is my mate, Panek said, the words falling into the cold air with the weight of shattered stone. It was not a confession. It was a decree, a statement of fact that defied argument. Gunnar actually recoiled, his face paling. The fury in his eyes was eclipsed by a dawning horror. No, the fates would not be so cruel. She has bewitched you. A Volkov spell. Enough, Branek snarled, taking a step toward him. He was no longer the conflicted man. He was the Alpha King, and his power rolled off him in palpable waves. Gunnar, for all his size and fury, instinctively lowered his head, a gesture of submission he clearly fought against. My bond is not a matter for debate in my council, and it is certainly not a matter for debate with you. You will hold your tongue, or I will tear it from your head. Is that understood? Gunnar's jaw worked, but he choked back whatever rebellious words were on his lips. Yes, Alpha, he ground out, the submission costing him dearly. Take her back to her room, Branek commanded, his eyes still locked on Gunnar, but his words were for me. Do not lock the door. She is to have the freedom of this tower. If anyone, including you, lays a hand on her or speaks a word to her that I have not authorized, I will hold you personally responsible. You will answer to me with your own hide. He finally looked at me, his eyes once again a maelstrom of conflict. Go. My feet felt like lead, but I obeyed. I walked past Gunnar, refusing to meet his hate-filled gaze, and descended the spiral stairs. The short journey back to my room felt like a lifetime. The king's indulgence had become the king's declaration. He had named me his mate in front of his beta. He had drawn a line in the snow, placing me on one side and his entire pack on the other. He had made his choice. Back in the room, I collapsed into the chair by the fire, my body trembling. I wrapped my arms around myself, but it did no good. The phantom sensation of his lips on my skin, of his hand in my hair, lingered. The memory was both terrifying and intoxicating. He had claimed me, not with a mark, but with words that were just as binding and far more dangerous. The unlocked door now felt different. It was no longer a test or a tentative freedom. It was a statement. I was no longer just Cerise Volkov, the prisoner. I was Cerise Volkov, the Alpha's mate, the curse made manifest. Maeve's prophecy was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. The next few days were a strange, tense quiet. Food was still brought by Lena, who was now paler than usual, her hands trembling as she set down the tray, her eyes never leaving the floor. I explored the confines of my new, expanded cage. The tower consisted of my room, the corridor with its glowering portraits, and the rooftop battlements, which I found myself drawn to again and again, seeking the wild solace of the wind. The pack left me alone, a bubble of fearful silence surrounding the tower. I was a leper with a king's protection. One afternoon, Branek came again. He did not bring his anger or his internal war. He brought an armful of books, their leather bindings worn with age. He set them on the small table without a word. I looked at the titles. They were not histories or books of law. One was a collection of ancient poetry. Another was a book of northern folk tales, stories of star-crossed lovers, of magical beasts, of kingdoms lost in the ice. It was an offering, a glimpse into a world beyond war and bloodlines. He was showing me that he saw more in me than just a name, a prophecy. He saw a mind, a person, locked away in the dark. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He gave a curt nod, his eyes lingering on my face for a moment before he turned and left. He did not touch me. He did not have to. The books were a more profound intimacy than his touch on the battlements had been. That was a claim of the wolf. This was an offering from the man. I lost myself in the stories. They were a sanctuary within a sanctuary, a place where I could forget for a few precious hours that my existence was a threat to the very foundations of the world. I was reading by the fire one evening, curled up in the chair with the black wolf pelt, which I had finally grudgingly accepted, draped over my lap when he returned. He entered so quietly I didn't hear him until he was standing by the hearth, watching me. He was dressed simply in a dark tunic and breeches, his hair unbound. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd seen them before. The weight of his choice was clearly a heavy burden. For a long time we said nothing. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the whisper of the wind at the window. The silence was not empty or oppressive. It was comfortable, a shared space, free of the demands of the world outside. My gaze fell upon the pale, silvered scar that cut across his jaw. It was a part of the formidable legend of the king, the mark of his victory in the border wars. But now, in the soft firelight, it just looked like a wound that had never truly healed. "How did you get it?" I asked, my voice soft. The question was an impulse, a breach of the careful distance between us, but I couldn't stop it. He seemed surprised by the question. He reached up, his fingers tracing the line of the scar, a thoughtful, almost pained look on his face. The official story, the one the bards sing in the great hall, is that I took it from the chieftain of the Red Fang Marauders, the moment before I broke his neck and ended the war. His tone told me that was not the real story. I waited, holding my breath. He sighed a heavy sound and sat down on the stone hearth, stretching his long legs out before him. He stared into the flames as he spoke, his voice low and devoid of its usual commanding tone. "The truth is, my own father gave it to me," I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. King Theron, the celebrated hero who had united the kingdom. "I was 17, Brannick said, his voice distant. "Still more pup than wolf. A Volkov raiding party had been spotted near our northern border. Not soldiers, refugees, a dozen of them. Mostly women and children, starving, fleeing the ruins of their home. My father rode out with his guard to cleanse the taint, as he called it." Brannick's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I went with him. I saw them. They were not monsters. They were just people. I spoke out. I said there was no honor in slaughtering the helpless." He looked at me then, and the pain in his eyes was a raw, open wound. He called it weakness, treason. He said I had been poisoned by sentiment. He drew his blade to teach me a lesson, to carve the weakness out of me, to remind me that a king's only loyalty is to his own blood and his own law. He touched the scar again. "This is not a mark of victory, Cyrus. It is a reminder of the price of power, the price of a crown forged in blood and hatred." The story shattered the myth of the monster king, revealing the burdened man beneath. The scar was not a symbol of his strength, but of his first rebellion against the cruelty he was being groomed to inherit. He was not his father. My heart ached for him, for the boy who had been wounded for showing mercy. Without thinking, I slipped off the chair and knelt on the floor in front of him. He watched me, his expression wary, his body tense. Slowly, I reached out my hand. He flinched, a barely perceptible motion, but he did not pull away. My fingers, trembling slightly, ghosted over his jaw, coming to rest on the scar. It was a ridge of smooth, cool skin against the rough warmth of his stubble. The contact was electric, but this time it was not a violent shockwave. It was a slow, deep current of understanding, of shared pain. He closed his eyes, his breath hitching. Under my touch, the king, the alpha, the formidable Brannick Thorn of all, seemed to let go of some immense burden he had been carrying. The lines of his face softened, the iron mask of command falling away to reveal a profound, heartbreaking vulnerability. My thumb stroked the length of the scar, a gesture of comfort, of acceptance. I was not just touching a wound. I was touching his history, his secret pain, the part of him that fought against the brutal legacy of his own bloodline. In this small, quiet room, we were not a Thornval and a Volkov. We were not a king and his curse. We were just a man with a scar, and a woman who understood what it meant to be wounded by your own kin. A sharp, piercing blast of a horn from the courtyard below shattered the moment. Brannick's eyes snapped open, instantly alert, the vulnerability gone, replaced by the hard, cold focus of a king. The alarm horn sounded again, a frantic, urgent cry of danger that cut through the night. He was on his feet in an instant, moving toward the window, all the softness gone from him. I scrambled up, my heart pounding with a new, terrifying dread. He looked down into the courtyard, and I saw his body go rigid. A low, feral growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" I whispered, rushing to his side. He put an arm out, barring me from the window, shielding me with his body. But I saw in the reflection on the dark glass, torches, dozens of them, moving through the snow surrounding the north tower. And the scent that drifted up even to our high window was unmistakable. It was the scent of a furious, blood-crazed pack. Gunnar had not held his tongue. He had lit a fire, and now the pack had come for the witch in the tower. The sanctuary was gone. The king had returned, and the war was no longer inside him. It was at his door. The roar from the courtyard was a primal, beastly sound, a symphony of rage from 200 throats. It wasn't the disciplined cry of warriors. It was the howl of a mob, hungry for blood, my blood. The flickering torchlight painted monstrous, dancing shadows against the tower walls, turning the pristine snow of the courtyard into a hellscape. They were chanting, a rhythmic, guttural roar that vibrated through the stone floor. "Volkov! Volkov! Purge the taint!" I shrank back from the window, a wave of cold terror washing over me, so potent it made my knees weak. This was the pack Maeve had spoken of, the pack that remembered the smell of their kin's blood. And now they were at my door, their hatred a living, breathing entity. Bronick stood like a statue of granite, his back to me, his entire focus on the scene below. The transformation in him was absolute. The vulnerable man who had allowed me to touch his scar was gone, consumed by the cold, calculating fury of the Alpha King. His scent filled the room, no longer just frost and iron, but something sharper, ozonic, like the air before a lightning strike. His power was a physical pressure, a force that made the very air in the room feel heavy and charged. "They will not have you," he said, his voice a low, chilling growl that was more wolf than man. He turned from the window, and his eyes were no longer the color of a storm. They were the color of glacial ice, hard and unforgiving. "This is Gunnar's doing. He has stoked their fear into a wildfire." "What will you do?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He was one wolf against his entire pack. Even an Alpha King could be torn down by the sheer weight of numbers if the pack turned on him. "I will remind them who their alpha is," he said, the words laced with deadly promise. He strode to the door, his movements economical and lethal. He paused with his hand on the latch, his back to me. "Stay here. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." He was going down there, alone, to face them. The thought sent a fresh spear of terror through me. "They'll kill you?" I breathed, the words a horrified realization. "To get to me, they'll tear you apart." He turned his head slightly, and his icy gaze met mine. A flicker of something, a grim, possessive satisfaction, warmed the frost in his eyes. "Let them try." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. I was alone with the roar of the mob and the pounding of my own heart. I rushed to the door, my fumbling hands finding the heavy iron bar on the inside that I had never noticed before. With a grunt of effort, I lifted it and slid it into the heavy brackets, sealing myself in. It felt like a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of hatred outside. I ran back to the window, my knuckles white as I gripped the iron bars. I could see him now, a lone dark figure emerging from the keep into the torch-lit chaos of the courtyard. The chanting faltered as he appeared, the roar of the mob momentarily subdued by the sheer, audacious presence of their king walking into their midst. Gunnar stood at the forefront of the pack, a massive, blood-mad brute, his face contorted in a zealous fury. Beside him stood Elder Maeve, her small frame a black hole of ancient malice in the flickering light. "Bronick," Gunnar bellowed, his voice carrying over the uneasy murmurs of the pack. "You see now, The pack will not tolerate this curse in our midst. We will not have the blood of the ravagers sleeping in our fortress. Give us the witch." A chorus of snarls and shouts of agreement rose from the crowd. They were on a knife's edge, their pack loyalty warring with the poison Gunnar and Maeve had fed them. Brannick did not shout. He did not draw a weapon. He simply walked forward until he stood a mere 10 feet from Gunnar, the space between them crackling with tension. He surveyed the crowd, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and dismissive. He was not afraid. He was insulted. "You dare," he said, his voice deceptively calm, yet it cut through the noise like a shard of ice. "You dare to gather like pups yapping in my own courtyard, making demands of your alpha?" "This is not a demand, it is a cleansing," Maeve shrieked, pointing a withered finger at the North Tower. "The prophecy must be broken. The taint must be purged before it takes root in you, in all of us." Brannick's gaze snapped to her, and the sheer force of his will made her flinch. "Your prophecies are the whispers of fear, old woman. I rule by strength and law, not by shadows and portents." He turned his attention back to his beta. "You have forgotten your oath, Gunnar. You have challenged my authority. You have incited my pack to treason." "It is you who is the traitor," Gunnar roared. Taking a step forward, his chest puffed out, his own alpha ambitions now laid bare for all to see. "You would sacrifice the pack for the sake of a Volkov whore. Your father would be ashamed. He would have slit her throat the moment her blood was known." The insult hit its mark. A low guttural growl ripped from Brannick's chest, a sound so feral and full of promise of violence that several wolves at the front of the mob took an involuntary step back. The air temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "My father is dead," Brannick snarled, his wolf now fully present, its golden light bleeding into his icy irises. "And his hatreds died with him. I am the alpha now. My mate is under my protection. The pack is under my command. Anyone who disputes that will answer to me, here, now." It was a direct challenge, a gambit of the highest stakes. He was forcing a confrontation, turning the mob's unfocused rage into a singular point of conflict. His authority versus Gunnar's. Gunnar let out a triumphant roar. This was what he wanted, a direct challenge. He believed the pack's fear of the Volkov blood was stronger than their loyalty to their king. He threw back his head and let his own wolf surge forward. The air around him shimmered as the change began. His bones cracking and reforming, his skin splitting to reveal coarse, dark fur. In seconds, the man was gone, replaced by a massive, slavering beast of a wolf, its eyes burning with red-hot fury. The pack roared its approval. They wanted a fight. They wanted blood. From my vantage point, I watched in horror as Brannick stood his ground. He did not shift. He remained in his human form, a deliberate, calculated insult to Gunnar's challenge. He was stating, in the clearest possible terms, that he did not even need his wolf to put down this rebellion. Gunnar's wolf form, enraged by the slight, lunged. It was a blur of black fur and flashing teeth, 1,000 pounds of muscle and fury, aimed at tearing out Brannick's throat. I screamed, my voice lost in the wind, my hands pressed against the cold glass. This was it. I was about to watch him die for me. Brannick moved with a speed that was utterly inhuman. He sidestepped the initial lunge, his arm shooting out not to strike, but to grab a fistful of the thick fur at the scruff of Gunnar's neck. He used the beast's own momentum, pivoting and slamming the massive wolf into the hard-packed snow of the courtyard, with a sound like a tree falling. The ground shook with the impact. Gunnar's wolf yelped, a sound of shock and pain, but it scrambled back to its feet, shaking its massive head. It circled Brannick, its lips drawn back in a rictus snarl, saliva dripping from its jaws. The pack watched, their earlier bloodlust now tempered with a shocked silence. They had never seen their king fight like this, with such cold, brutal efficiency in his human form. The wolf lunged again, this time low, aiming to cripple him. Brannick didn't retreat. He met the charge head-on. As the massive jaws snapped shut inches from his leg, he brought his knee up with bone-shattering force, catching the wolf directly under its jaw. There was a sickening crack, and the beast howled in agony, stumbling back, blood now staining its dark fur. Brannek did not give it a moment to recover. He advanced, a relentless predator. "You are my beta, Gunner," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl that was somehow more menacing than the wolf's own. "You were meant to be my shield, my sword, and you chose to be a rabid dog. You chose to threaten what is mine." With another impossibly fast move, he was on the injured wolf, one hand gripping its throat, the other twisting the arm that was still vaguely human in its lupine form. There was another sharp crack, and the wolf collapsed onto its side, whimpering, its front leg broken and bent at an unnatural angle. Brannek stood over the defeated, writhing form of his beta, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with golden light. He was untouched, unharmed. The courtyard was utterly silent, save for the panting of the victorious alpha and the pathetic whimpers of the challenger. He looked up from the broken form of Gunner and let his gaze sweep over the stunned faces of his pack. His eyes were pure alpha, radiating a power so immense and absolute that it was a physical force. Wolves lowered their heads. Warriors who had been baying for my blood a moment before now could not meet their king's gaze. He had not just defeated Gunner, he had shattered the foundation of their rebellion with a display of raw, undeniable dominance. "I am Brannek Thornaval," he roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the keep. "This is my territory, this is my pack, and the woman in that tower is my mate. Her blood is my blood, her life is my life. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who defies me on this will be met with the same fate as this fool at my feet." He kicked Gunner's prone form, a final gesture of contempt. "Only I will not be so merciful as to leave you breathing." He stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of his words, the finality of his decree, sink into every one of them. He had done it. He had faced them down and won. He had not just chosen me. He had bound my fate to his, to the pack's, inextricably and irrevocably. He had declared my cursed blood to be his own. He turned then, his back on the broken challenger and the shamed pack, and began to walk back toward the keep. The wolves parted before him, their heads bowed low in submission, their earlier fury now replaced with a grudging, fearful respect. Only Maeve remained standing tall, her face a mask of thwarted hatred, her eyes, when they flickered up toward my window, promising that this was not over. I stumbled back from the window, my legs finally giving out from under me. I slid down the cold stone wall to the floor, my body shaking with the aftershocks of what I had just witnessed. He hadn't just saved my life. He had rewritten the laws of his kingdom for me. He had taken Maeve's prophecy and, instead of running from it, had embraced it, forcing his entire world to bend to the will of his bond. The king's indulgence had become the Alpha's law, and the price of that law, I feared, was a debt that would be paid in blood. The heavy bar felt like a dead weight in my trembling hands as I lifted it from its brackets. The door swung inward, and he was there, filling the frame, a monolith carved from winter and violence. He brought the scent of the courtyard in with him, the sharp tang of spilled blood, the cold bite of the snow, the electric ozone of his own contained fury. A small weeping cut marred his knuckles, a stark slash of red against pale skin, the only visible sign of the brutal fight. It was Gunner's blood. I didn't think. I moved. I met him at the threshold, my hands flying to his chest, his arms, his face, a frantic, desperate search for injuries my eyes couldn't see. He was solid and warm beneath my touch, the steady thrum of his heart, a reassurance that he was real, that he was whole. He allowed the inspection, his body rigid at first, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, relaxing into my touch. The Alpha King who had just broken his pact to his will was allowing me, the source of all his trouble, to see the man beneath the armor. "You're hurt," I whispered, my fingers brushing the cut on his hand. "Not my blood," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. He caught my hand, his grip gentle but firm, and held it against his chest, right over his heart. His ease, the icy fury finally receding, searched my face. "Are you unharmed?" I could only nod. My throat tight with a tangle of emotions too vast to name. Terror, relief, guilt, and a fierce possessive awe that stunned me with its intensity. "You did this, all of this for me." "I did this for us," he corrected, his voice dropping lower, the words a vow. "There is no me without you now. I have made it so. The pack knows it. The law knows it. The very stones of this fortress know it." He drew me fully into the room and pushed the heavy door shut, dropping the bar himself. The sound of it sliding home did not feel like imprisonment this time. It felt like a sanctuary sealed against the world. He turned back to me, and I saw the exhaustion finally settle into the lines of his face. He had won the battle, but the war for his pack's soul was far from over. He had held his kingdom together with fear and dominance, but the cracks were showing. "Gunnar will live, Tatov," he said, as if sensing my unspoken question. "He is broken in body and spirit. He will be exiled, sent to the Icefang garrison on the farthest northern border. A fate worse than death for a wolf like him." He walked to the fire, staring into the flames. "But the fear he planted will not be so easily banished. Maeve still has the ear of the elders. She will whisper her poison, her prophecies." "She believes I am a curse that will destroy you," I said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Tonight, you proved her right in a way. You broke your beta and defied your pack because of me." He turned to me, his expression grim. "I did what any alpha would do to protect his mate. The Thornival line has grown too rigid, too enamored with its own history. They have forgotten that law is meaningless without the strength to enforce it. And they have forgotten that a bond like ours is a law unto itself, older and more powerful than any decree carved in stone." He reached out, his wounded hand gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was no longer hesitant. It was certain, proprietary. "Your blood is not a curse, Cerise. It is just different. And they fear what they do not understand." He led me to the chairs by the fire, sitting opposite me, the wolf pelt I had been using now pooled on the floor between us. "The Volkovs. The histories are not entirely lies. They were wild, feral at times, but it was not because they were monsters. It was because their connection to their wolves, to the land itself, was deeper, more primal than ours. We Thornivals rule through order, law, and control. The Volkovs ruled through instinct, passion, and a connection to the old magic, the spirit of the mountain itself." My heart hammered in my chest. This was the truth I had sensed, the whisper of defiance I'd felt when reading the Thornival histories. "My father believed that power needed to be tamed, beaten into submission," Brennet continued, his gaze distant. "He taught that the beast was a tool, to be used and then caged. He feared its appetites. The Volkovs believed the beast was a partner, a guide. They did not cage it, they ran with it. Sometimes that led them to darkness, but sometimes—" He looked at me, and his eyes held a strange, hungry light. "Sometimes it gave them a strength we have long since forgotten." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is a place, deep in the mountain beneath this fortress, the Heart Chamber. It is where the first Thornival Alpha forged a pact with the spirit of the mountain, binding our bloodline to this land, granting us our authority. The throne in the Great Hall is just a symbol. The true source of the Thornival power is down there, in the dark." He paused, his expression growing troubled. "But the connection has weakened over generations. My father felt it. I feel it. We control the pack, but we no longer speak to the mountain. We have forgotten the language." Before I could ask what he meant, a tremor ran through the stone floor beneath us. It was subtle, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very foundations of the tower. The flames in the hearth wavered, casting eerie, dancing shadows. Bronick was on his feet in an instant, his head cocked, listening. And then I felt it. A sharp, agonizing pain lanced through my head, originating not from my own body, but from the bond I shared with him. It was a cry of pure agony, a spiritual tearing. I gasped, clutching my temples as the room swam before my eyes. "Brannick?" I cried out, seeing him stagger, one hand pressed against the stone wall for support. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. The golden light in his eyes, the vibrant presence of his wolf, was flickering like a dying candle. "The heart chamber," he grunted, his voice strained with pain. Someone is down there. They're poisoning the source." Maeve. It had to be her. She couldn't challenge him with force, so she was attacking him through the very heart of his power. Using some dark ritual to sever his connection to the mountain, to his ancestors, to his own wolf. The prophecy is clear. The winter wolf will break his kingdom on the altar of his bond. She wasn't just trying to kill him, she was trying to break him, to unmake him as an alpha. Another wave of pain, sharper this time, rolled through the bond, and Brannick cried out, a raw, guttural sound. He fell to one knee, his body trembling with the effort of fighting an unseen enemy. In that moment, everything became terrifyingly clear. My passivity, my fear, it was a luxury I could no longer afford. Brannick had fought for me. Now I had to fight for him. The Volkov blood, the wild thing inside me that he said spoke the mountain's language, it was not my curse. It was his only hope. "I'm coming with you," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "No," he gasped, his teeth clenched. "It's too dangerous. She will kill you." "She's already killing you," I shot back, pulling him to his feet. His weight was immense, but a surge of adrenaline gave me strength. "You said it yourself. Your line has forgotten the language. Maybe mine remembers." He looked at me, his eyes clouded with pain, but filled with a dawning, desperate hope. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. Together, we half stumbled, half ran from the room, leaving the sanctuary of the tower behind. The corridors were deserted, the pack either hiding in their dens or gathered with Maeve in the mountain's heart. Brannick led us to a small, unassuming door behind a tapestry in a forgotten hall. The air that billowed out as he opened it was ancient and cold, smelling of deep earth and stone dust. The tunnel beyond was rough-hewn, spiraling down into darkness. Brannick snatched a torch from a wall sconce, and we plunged into the black. The pain from the bond was a constant, sickening thrum. With every step we took downward, I could feel his strength failing, his wolf spirit weakening. He leaned on me more and more, his breathing labored. Meanwhile, something inside me was waking up. The scent of the deep earth, the feel of the ancient stone. It was familiar, like a half-remembered dream. My Volkov blood was singing, a low, powerful hum that resonated with the very mountain we were in. We emerged into a vast cavern. In the center, on a raised dais of black volcanic rock, stood a throne. But this was no throne of bone or wood. It seemed to be carved from the mountain itself, a single massive crystal that pulsed with a faint silvery light. This was the heart chamber, the source of Thorn of all power. And Maeve was there. She stood before the crystal throne, her arms raised, her voice a high, chanting shriek. The air was thick with the scent of burning bloodroot and silver dust. Around her stood a dozen of Gunnar's most loyal guards, their faces grim, their spears forming a protective circle. She was pouring a dark, viscous liquid from a bowl onto the base of the crystal, which was now flickering violently, its silver light tainted with sickly black veins. Brannick let out a roar of fury and pain, shoving me behind him as he staggered forward. "Maeve, stop this treason!" She turned, a triumphant, crazed look on her face. Her eyes were alight with fanatical fire. "It is not treason, my king. It is salvation. I am purging the curse. I am severing the bond that will be our doom. The mountain demands a sacrifice. Your bond for your crown. You were too weak to choose, so I have chosen for you." The guards leveled their spears, blocking Brannick's path. In his weakened state, he could never fight his way through them. He was trapped, his power being drained away with every passing second. He was dying. The mountain was dying. And it was all because of me, and in that moment the fear was gone, burned away by a cold, clear certainty. Maeve was wrong. The mountain didn't want a sacrifice. It wanted balance. It wanted the order of the Thornival wolf and the wild magic of the Volkov blood united. No, I said, my voice ringing out with an authority that silenced the cavern. Maeve and the guards turned to look at me, their expressions of shock and contempt. I walked past Brenek, his hand reaching for me, trying to pull me back, but I shook him off. I walked toward the circle of spears, my eyes locked on the poisoned, flickering crystal. You don't understand the old magic, seer, I said, my voice filled with the humming power of the mountain itself. You speak of taints and curses. You use poison and corrupted rituals. You seek to cut away a part of him, but you cannot heal a body by cutting out its heart. I did not stop at the line of spears. I walked right toward them, my gaze unwavering. The guards, faced with this strange, wolfless Omega who radiated an ancient power they didn't comprehend, hesitated. Their spear points wavered. I reached the dais. Maeve shrieked, a wordless cry of rage, and tried to block my path. I simply pushed past her, my touch sending a jolt through her that made her stumble back. I knelt before the crystal throne, the source of my mate's pain. The black poison was spreading, the silver light fading fast. I knew what I had to do. The language of the mountain was not spoken in words. It was spoken in blood. My blood. Without hesitation, I grabbed a shard of sharp obsidian from the ritual bowl on the floor. I looked back at Brenek. His face was a mask of horror and disbelief as he realized what I was about to do. Our eyes met, and I poured every ounce of love, of certainty, of defiance I felt into that single look. I did this for us. Then I turned back to the throne and drew the shard across my palm. Blood, dark and rich, welled up. I pressed my bleeding hand against the cold, dying crystal. The moment my blood touched it, the cavern exploded with light. It was not the calm, silvery light of the Thornivals, but a wild green and gold energy, the color of ancient forests and raw earth. A wave of pure, untamed magic erupted from the crystal, throwing Maeve and her guards back like dolls. It surged into me, a roaring inferno of power that lit up every cell of my body and threw me into the bond, a direct conduit to the man on his knees behind me. I screamed as the power of the mountain, the untamed spirit of my ancestors, poured through me, a current too strong for any mortal body to hold. It was agony and ecstasy, a feeling of being unmade and reborn, all at once. The black poison in the crystal hissed and evaporated under the torrent of life. The silver light returned, now intertwined with brilliant veins of emerald green. I had not just healed the heart. I had changed it forever. I had woven my blood, the cursed Volkov blood, into the very source of the Thornival kingdom. But the cost was immense. The light was consuming me, burning me from the inside out. My vision was fading to white, the roar in my ears drowning out everything else. My last conscious thought was of Brennick's face, his eyes wide with terror as he shouted my name, reaching for me as I collapsed into the blinding, all-consuming light. I returned to consciousness slowly, as if surfacing from a deep, dark sea. The first thing I registered was the scent. Frost, iron, pine. But underneath it, a new vibrant note of rich, damp earth and burgeoning life, like the forest floor after a spring rain. It was the scent of Brenek, but it was also the scent of the healed mountain, the scent of us. The second thing I felt was warmth, a solid living heat enveloping me, a steady rhythmic beat against my ear, a heartbeat. My eyes fluttered open. I was not in the heart chamber. I was in the king's bed, in his private chambers, a room I had never seen. It was a space of stark, masculine simplicity, dark wood, heavy furs, and massive stone hearth where a fire blazed. Sunlight, clear and bright, streamed through a large unbarred window, glinting off the melting icicles that clung to the frame. The blizzard had broken. The long winter was over. I was curled against Bronek's side, his arms securely around me, my head pillowed on his chest. He was awake, had clearly been awake for some time, simply watching me, his expression one of profound, reverent awe. The lines of exhaustion and conflict were gone from his face, replaced by a deep, abiding peace I had never seen there before. His wolf was calm, a steady, golden presence that shone from his eyes, no longer at war with the man. "Cerise," he breathed, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He smoothed the hair back from my forehead, his touch infinitely tender. "What happened?" I whispered, my own voice hoarse. My body ached with a strange, pleasant weariness, like I had run for 100 miles and finally found my way home. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us all." He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at me. "When you touched the Heartstone, the magic, it didn't just heal the breach. It forged a new pact. The old Thornival covenant was one of dominion, of control. What you created is a covenant of balance, of unity." He took my hand, the one I had cut, and turned it over. A thin silvery scar, shaped like a lightning strike, now traced a path across my palm. It pulsed with a faint inner light. "The mountain accepted your blood. It recognized the Volkov line not as a curse, but as its other half, the wild heart to our ordered mind." I sat up, pulling the heavy fur blanket around my shoulders. I felt different. The restless phantom energy of my caged wolf was gone. In its place was a quiet, humming strength, a sense of being utterly and completely whole. For the first time in my life, I felt the presence of my wolf, not as a ghost, but as a settled, integrated part of my soul. I had no urge to shift, no need to prove my form. I was wolf and woman, seamlessly one. "And Maeve?" I asked, a sliver of the old fear returning. "The magic you unleashed did not harm her," Branek said, his expression hardening slightly. "But it showed her the truth, the raw, undeniable power of our united bloodlines. It broke her faith in the old prophecies. Her hatred was built on fear, and you showed her a power greater than fear. She and her followers have sworn a new oath, not just to the Thornival king, but to the wardens of the heart." He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that transformed his face. "To us." The door to the chambers opened, and Lena entered, bearing a tray. But this time, she did not avert her eyes. She met my gaze and inclined her head in a gesture of deep, profound respect. "My queen," she said, her voice clear and steady. The title hung in the air, as shocking and as natural as the sunlight streaming through the window. She placed the tray on a nearby table and retreated, closing the door softly behind her. Queen. The word was absurd. I was the forgotten Omega, the prisoner in the tower. But as I looked at Branek, at the open adoration on his face, at the way the very air in the room seemed to bend to our shared presence, I understood. The old titles, the old divisions, Omega, Alpha, Thornival, Volkov, they were meaningless now. We had created something new. Later that day, we walked out into the courtyard. The snow is melting rapidly in the spring sun, revealing the first hints of green shoots in the dark earth. The pack was gathered, not as a mob, but as a quiet, watchful assembly. When we appeared, a ripple of awe went through them. They could feel it, the new balance of power, the calm strength that radiated from their alpha, the wild, life-giving magic that emanated from me. One by one, the warriors, the weavers, the elders, they dropped to one knee, not in fear, as they had before, but in genuine, hard-won loyalty. My gaze swept over them, and I saw not the faces of my tormentors, but the faces of my people, my pack. We walked past them, out of the main gates of the fortress, and for the first time, I set foot outside the walls as a free woman. Branek led me to a small, secluded bluff overlooking the valley. The view was magnificent. The entire kingdom, a patchwork of dark forests, silver rivers, and sprawling plains, lay spread out before us, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. "This is what you saved," Branek said, his arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me close to his side. Not just me, all of this. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, the scent of home. The past was a landscape of shadows and shame, but the future was as vast and as promising as the kingdom stretching out before us. The whispers of the old blood had not been a curse, but a song, waiting for the right voice to sing it. The stories will change now, I said softly. The bards will have to write new songs. Yes, he agreed, his lips brushing against my temple. They will sing of the winter wolf who found his heart in the fires of the cursed blood. They will sing of the forgotten Omega who became a queen, not by birth or by conquest, but by healing the wounds of a kingdom. He turned me to face him, his hands cupping my face, his storm-gray eyes now clear and bright as a spring sky, filled with a love so fierce and absolute it took my breath away. I thought you were my ruin, Curice, my beautiful, inescapable doom, but you were my salvation. You are the other half of my crown, the wild magic to my iron law. You are my kingdom. And when he kissed me, there on the edge of the world, it was not the desperate, claiming kiss of the battlements. It was the tender, reverent kiss of a king who had finally found his queen, of a wolf who had finally found his soul. It was a promise, sealed not in blood, but in the brilliant, hopeful light of a new dawn. I was no longer the forgotten Omega, or the forbidden bloodline. I was Cerise Thorneval Volkov, Queen of the Mountain, and my reign, our reign, had just begun.